We have just a few hours to go before what's being called the mother of all reforms comes into being. And I want to go across now, live and exclusive to Chennai. Joining us from there, the man who for the first time proposed the GST on the floor of the House when in 2005-2006 he introduced VAT in his union budget. Former Finance Minister, senior Congress leader, one of India's foremost economic minds, P. Chidambaram, joins us live on India Today. Welcome, Mr. Chidambaram. The rollout of the GST is a long cherished dream of yours. This is what you worked hard towards make happen. And at the stroke of the midnight hour, at the turn of the month, when the GST is finally introduced, neither you nor your party will be there to take your share of the credit for this, Mr. Chidambaram.
Well, I think one doesn't have to take credit. One does work. One's work speaks for itself. I think the people of India know that GST was an idea conceived by the UPA government, and the spade work, in fact, more than the spade work, was done by the UPA government until 2014.
Absolutely. But now, when the GST is finally being rolled out, for what the government calls churlish political reasons, the opposition, including the Congress, has decided to boycott, despite the fact that Dr. Manmohan Singh had earlier indicated to the government that he was willing to come and share the dais. The government said we were willing to share credit. The Congress is playing politics.
Well, I'm in Chennai. I can't comment on the party's decision. I think the party spokesman may or will speak on the subject. As far as I'm concerned, I have said that we welcome the GST, although it's an imperfect tax, and it's the culmination of many, many years of work. It should have come earlier, at least 3 or 4 years earlier. The BJP wishes to take credit for running the last lap. They are welcome to do, but they should also remember that the last lap was delayed for nearly 5 or 6 years by the BJP.
So if I were to extrapolate what you're suggesting, is it correct to say you feel it would have been better had the opposition, including the Congress, been present for the introduction of possibly the one single biggest tax reform India has ever seen?
Well, I think there were equally important tax reforms in the past. This is the most recent one. I think major tax reforms were done by Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was finance minister. I did major direct tax reforms in the 1997 budget. So I think this is an equally important tax reforms, and I'm willing to concede that it's a game changer. But what kind of invitation was given, what kind of discussions took place between the government and the Congress leadership, I'm not privy to that, so I do not wish to comment on that.
Fact is, and you know this better than anyone else, that there are huge vested interests at play. There are many traders all across the country who for decades have evaded tax, maintaining kacha bills, pakka bills. With GST, tax evasion becomes that much tougher. This lot of traders will never be ready. They will want that the GST get derailed. They will never accept that they're ready. Why should they be? It impacts their interests.
I don't agree at all. I don't agree at all. That's a very harsh statement. I think most people want to do legitimate business, and most people want to be on the right side of law. There are, of course, extra legal, extra legitimate commercial transactions. They will always be outside the pale of the law. Let the law take action against them. Smuggling, drug trafficking, human trafficking, prostitution, illegal liquor trade, illegal arms trade. They are out of the law. They are outlawed activities. Take action against them. But I think small, medium and large businesses, especially small and medium businesses, cannot afford to fall foul of the law. Yes, here and there they may cut a few corners, but that's because of oppressive tax rates and very, very harsh tax administration. If you can point to a businessman who's evading tax, I can point to a tax administrator, tax official who seeks rents. So one does not condone the other. But don't say that the tax administration in this country is pure and holy and beyond criticism.
What do you believe are the mistakes the current government has made? If you were still in the saddle, what would you have done differently?
You see, let me reiterate the positive aspects of GST. It's a tax that will subsume many taxes. It will capture nearly all commercial transactions. It will eliminate cascading of the tax burden. It will enlarge the tax base. These are the reasons which prompted us to propose GST. Now today, the GST law that is in place has several imperfections. Let me list them very quickly. Firstly, there is not a standard rate. When I say a standard rate, I mean a standard rate, a demerit rate and a concessional rate. Actually, we have something like 7 or 8 rates. Secondly, there is a diarchy in administration. One set of taxpayers will be under state governments, one set of taxpayers will be under the central government. Now, who will be assigned to which government? I suppose a lottery will decide that. Thirdly, the number of returns a person is to file is 3 per month. That is undeniable. So 12 into 3 is 36 plus 1 annual return. And if he has got a multi-state business, this 37 returns must be filed in each state. Just imagine the amount of time and energy that has to be spent in filing returns.
But you've heard
Then
what...
there's anti-profiteering authority. It's an abomination. It's an abomination. It's the product of a mind which does not understand economics or markets or business or competition. And now I am told that the Revenue Secretary has diluted it substantially by saying it's intended to be used only against big business houses which has turnovers running into hundreds of crores of rupees. I think in all fairness, the GST should have been allowed to run on a trial basis for at least 2 months, so people get used to the idea of filing the returns, paying the taxes on a trial basis, and then it should have been implemented. The trial period of 2 months would have boosted the confidence of the small and medium business houses that this animal is not something to be so frightened about and we can cope with the new regime. Today we are starting with uncertainty, apprehension and the fear of harassment.
Uncertainty, apprehension would have been there, Mr. Chidambaram, even a couple of months later. You know, what do you make of what the finance minister says, that an imperfect GST is better than no GST? Whenever you launch the GST, there will be the kind of concerns you've spoken of, and it's inevitable. I interviewed Piyush Goyal, who said the only way to learn swimming is to jump into the pool. You will survive, people will figure out what to do in a couple of weeks, things will resolve themselves.
Well, this couple of weeks argument we heard even on November 8. Was it resolved in a couple of weeks? I think a government must defer to the voices of the people. Forget the opposition parties. Forget what I have said and written. Chambers of Commerce, business associations, they've all said, implemented. Of course, we welcome the GST, but allay our apprehensions, give us some time to get prepared. Now, if we have waited between 2005 and 2017, would the heavens have fallen if we had waited for another 2 or 3 months?
To that, Mr.
I don't
Jaitley
think
says
so.
that there is a constitutional
For whatever
mandate
reason,
from the 1st of September. It
government-
has to be implemented. There is no two ways around it.
That's not correct. Even 1st of September would have given you 2 months. All that it means is the new law has to be notified. Even 1st of September would have given the 2 months which most people were asking for. Anyway, all that is history now. Question is, what is the way forward? The way forward is to administer the law with a benign hand for at least 6 months to a year. The way forward is to keep the anti-profiteering authority in abeyance until we know how markets are working to prevent profiteering. The way forward is to revisit the returns. In many countries, returns are filed only once a quarter. Why do we have to file 3 returns every month? I'm sure if half a dozen heads are knocked together, they'll find a way in which you don't have to file 3 returns a month, 36 plus 1 returns a year, and in each state in which you are doing business. And you must find a way in which compliance costs are reduced for people who have multi-state businesses. If I have a business in 10 states and the turnover in each state is over 1.5 crore, the kind of compliance that is required in 10 states is mind-boggling. Many of them will close down some of their businesses in some states in order to keep the costs of compliance low. So I think the imperfections that I've pointed out, and I'll write about it, must be addressed by adopting a bipartisan approach, bringing experts, and trying to remove as much of the imperfections as possible.
But Mr. Chidambaram,
enough to say
the
an
government
imperfect
will
tax is
argue
better
that the
than
approach so
no
far
tax.
has
Of
been
course.
bipartisan.
But
They
it
will
is-
say that all decisions have been taken in the GST Council where the government isn't the sole decision-making authority. The actual voting powers lie with the states, and therefore all decisions that have been taken on tax rates, on implementation, how the system should function, have all been taken in keeping the federal structure in mind.
Bipartisan is different from agreement between center and state governments. State governments have their own motivations. Are you a manufacturing state? Are you a consuming state? State governments are keen to protect their own revenues. So state governments can easily agree to compromises and can also force compromises. In fact, the GST law is a very compromised law, a very compromised act, which is why petroleum is kept out, alcohol is kept out, electricity is kept out, real estate is kept out, which is why you have got 7 or 8 rates, which is why you have this question, is Kit Kat chocolate or biscuit? Because you are taxing chocolates differently and biscuits differently. So state governments will readily compromise as long as they can force compromise on some issues they are keen about. Bipartisanship can only occur at the political level, at the leadership level of the national and the major state parties. I don't think there has been any engagement after the GST constitution amendment bills were passed. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no engagement at the leadership level between the BJP political party and the Congress, CPIM, and the major state parties like SP, TDP, Biju Janata Dal. I don't think there has been an engagement at the leadership level of these political parties.
Finally,
Engaging political parties at the leadership level is the true mark of bipartisanship.
Finally, Mr. Chidambaram, how much of an upside do you see once GST comes into play with the GDP? There were estimates which came in earlier that GDP could help India's economy grow 2% faster than its usual rate. How do you see GDP numbers play out post GST?
This is speculative. All other things being equal, but please remember, all other things are never equal always. All other things being equal, what we say ceteris paribus, GST should add to growth, but not all other things will remain equal. The GDP will be affected by other factors. There will be some rise in inflation in the short term. The monsoon will largely decide whether we have high growth or no. International trade will decide whether we have good exports or no. International prices, internationally traded goods prices will decide our trade balances.
Okay.
So since not all other things are equal, nobody can predict the impact of GST, but as I said, GST was a law that should improve efficiency of tax collection and should therefore boost GDP growth.
I'm going to leave it there. It's always fascinating chatting with you, Mr. Chidambaram. You've had your say, you've made your points, your statements not quite as much at odds with the government as some of your colleagues in the Congress, but you've made your point. We leave it to our viewers to decide what they make of the man who first introduced the GST in a budget. Neither he nor his party will be there when it's implemented, but he's saying that the Congress does support the GST and this is a game changer for India. Thank you very much, Mr. Chidambaram, for joining us on India Today.